Commander Alara Jenks stood in the center of Arivos 9's command deck, the subtle hum of the ship's engines threading through the silence. Her suit, a sleek weave of dark alloy and adaptive fiber, bore the initials EGX over the chest plate, a reminder of her identity in a place that seemed determined to strip such things away. Beyond the forward viewport, the ashen surface of the exoplanet K-317 turned slowly, its craters catching pale light from the distant star. The planet was lifeless. Supposedly, that made it safe. Around her, the rest of the crew occupied their assigned stations. Lieutenant Rafe Calder, the ship's security officer, sat at the tactical console, his gaze flicking between glowing readouts and the slow arc of the planet's horizon. At the science terminal, Dr. Maeve Thorne's fingers moved with deliberate precision over her datapad, though her pale eyes darted to Alara now and then, measuring her reactions. In the corner, hunched over a bank of sensor equipment, Dr. Auric Vaughn was a study in composure, his white lab coat at odds with the black metal around him. He seemed absorbed in the shifting patterns of data projected into the air before him, but Alara had already learned that nothing distracted Vaughn, not really. "This," Vaughn began, his voice smooth as polished steel, "is history in the making. You have been selected from hundreds to participate in the Earth Alliance's most ambitious human behavioral trial." He didn't look up, as though the announcement were a formality. "We will simulate the conditions of an extended deep space colonization effort, stress included. I will monitor all variables." Alara's jaw tightened. She'd heard those words in the mission briefings back on Luna Base, but hearing them now, here, felt different. The mission parameters had been vague then. They were still vague now. And the word stress sounded more like a threat than a scientific objective. "Communications with the Alliance Command will be heavily restricted," Vaughn continued. "This is to prevent external influence on your natural responses. Supplies will be rationed according to test needs, not comfort. Every event you encounter will be part of the study. Even," his eyes finally lifted, locking on hers, "if it feels dangerous." That last line hung in the air. Calder glanced over his shoulder, frowning slightly, but said nothing. Maeve's lips pressed into a thin line. Alara kept her expression neutral, though a cold current wound its way down her spine. The first 3 days passed under an uneasy rhythm. Vaughn kept the crew occupied with tasks, calibrating sensors, mapping atmospheric anomalies on K-317, running simulations of colony structures in the ship's holorum. But nothing about the schedule felt organic. Assignments overlapped without reason, forcing crew members to work in tight quarters with mounting tension. Twice, the environmental system shifted without warning, plunging a corridor into freezing cold for hours before restoring balance. Vaughn's explanation was always the same: variable introduction, necessary for authentic data. On the 4th day, the first true incident occurred. The life support grid in Sector C collapsed without warning, locking 2 crew members, Engineer Soria Hale and Communications Officer Andrick Lowe, inside. By the time Calder bypassed the hatch controls, both were unconscious from oxygen deprivation. They were revived in medical, but the terror in their eyes was unmistakable. Vaughn called the event an important observation point. His tone carried the detached satisfaction of a man who'd just acquired an interesting specimen. That night, Alara stood alone in the observation deck, staring down at the planet's shadowed side. Her reflection in the glass stared back, dark eyes sharp beneath the curve of the viewport. Every instinct she'd honed over years of command whispered that this was no controlled trial. The power fluctuations, the engineered conflicts, the dangerous malfunctions, they weren't accidental variables. Someone was pulling the strings, and it wasn't to test their resilience. Maeve appeared in the doorway, her voice low. "You noticed it too." Alara didn't turn. "Noticed what?" "The logs," Maeve said, stepping closer. "They're wrong. My atmospheric data from yesterday, it's been altered. Entire readings wiped and replaced with fabricated values." Alara's jaw clenched. "Who has clearance to edit mission logs?" Maeve hesitated. "Officially? Only you and Vaughn." Silence stretched between them, the weight of it heavy as the black space beyond the glass. Alara's mind ran through possibilities, none of them good. A faint chime from the ship's intercom shattered the moment. Vaughn's voice echoed through the deck. All crew to the main lab. We have a new phase to initiate. As she followed Maeve toward the lab, Alara's steps were deliberate, every muscle coiled with unspoken tension. She didn't know yet what Vaughn's real objective was, but she knew one thing with unshakable certainty. If this was an experiment, the test was already over. It had become something else entirely. The main lab's lights burned brighter than usual, casting long, sterile shadows across polished steel and glass. Alara entered with measured steps, aware of the subtle glances between crew members. Calder stood near the entrance, arms folded, his posture radiating suspicion. Maeve kept close to him, her data pad clutched like a shield. At the center of the room, Dr. Vaughn manipulated a series of holographic displays, shifting data windows as if orchestrating a performance only he understood. Today, Vaughn announced, we begin a critical stage. A unique environmental agent will be introduced into the ship's biosphere. It is inert, harmless, merely a factor to study adaptation. His voice was too smooth, the confidence in it too absolute, and Alara caught the fleeting stiffness in Calder's jaw. She stepped forward. What's the nature of this agent? Vaughn's eyes glinted, but his tone didn't change. Proprietary to the Alliance. Non-disruptive in low doses. Your only concern is to continue your duties without deviation. I'll monitor responses. The explanation was a curtain drawn across a darkened stage. She didn't believe a word of it. Over the next 48 hours, the atmosphere aboard Arrivo's 9 shifted, subtly at first, then with an undercurrent of unease. Crew members grew irritable over minor errors. Conversations became curt, shoulders tense. Sleep cycles fractured. Calder reported a malfunction in the filtration array that should have triggered alarms, but didn't. Vaughn claimed it was unrelated to his agent. Maeve pulled Alara aside in the hydroponics bay. I ran a covert analysis, she whispered, scanning for surveillance before speaking. It's not inert. The compound in the air contains engineered microbial chains. They're adapting to human biochemistry, slowly, deliberately. And they're coded. Alara frowned. Coded for what? Maeve's voice dropped further. Behavioral influence. It's targeting neurological pathways, impulse control, emotional regulation. This isn't a simulation, Commander. It's a live weapons test. The weight of those words settled over Alara like lead. The pieces fell into place. The staged crises, the communication blackout, Vaughn's manipulations. They weren't studying colonization stress. They were measuring the breaking point of a human crew under a biochemical assault. She found Calder in the corridor outside his quarters, checking a handheld scanner. Maeve's confirmed it, she said quietly. This is a weapon trial. We're the subjects. His gaze hardened. Then we're already casualties if we don't stop it. They began meeting in secret, choosing isolated maintenance conduits and shielded alcoves where the ship's monitoring systems were weaker. Calder's security access let them intercept partial data streams, while Maeve decrypted fragments of Vaughn's personal archive. What they uncovered was worse than they had imagined. Orders from an unmarked command node within the Alliance hierarchy, authorizing pathogen trial E9 for pre-conflict readiness. Target populations were listed, colonial settlements near contested borders. Alara stared at the files until the lines blurred. They're preparing to deploy this against civilians. Their whispered alliance grew stronger but more dangerous. Twice, they narrowly avoided detection by junior crew loyal to Vaughn's authority. The paranoia on board had teeth now. People whispered in corners. Meals were eaten in silence. On the 7th day, the first casualty occurred. Engineer Soria Hale was found in the access bay, delirious and violent, her nails bloodied from clawing at the bulkhead. Calder and Alara restrained her, but her strength was unnatural, her words incoherent. Maeve scanned her, her hands shaking. Neurological overdrive. The pathogens accelerating. They moved her to the medical bay, locking it down, but Vaughn arrived minutes later. Release her to me, he said with chilling calm. She needs treatment, Alara countered. She needs to complete the trial, Vaughn replied. His tone wasn't angry, it was worse. It was final. Calder stepped between them. With respect, Doctor, You're not getting through that door. The tension in the room thickened, every heartbeat stretching into a standoff. Vaughn's expression didn't falter. Defiance will compromise the data, he said, as if that were the only consequence that mattered. In that moment, something in Alara crystallized. She wasn't a subject in his study. She was a soldier in a war that had already begun, and she had just been waiting for the enemy to show its face. When Vaughn finally turned and walked away, the three of them remained in the sterile glow of the med bay, the muffled sound of Soria's labored breathing filling the space. Alara's gaze met Calder's, then Maeve's. "This ends," she said, her voice low but edged with steel. "We take the ship." And for the first time since the mission began, she felt the tight coil of fear inside her unwind into something far more dangerous: resolve. The plan was simple in theory and treacherous in execution. Calder would override the bridge's biometric security from the auxiliary console in engineering. Maeve would trigger a false environmental alert to draw loyal crew away from their stations, and Alara would lead the final push to seize control. They moved like shadows through the dim-lit corridors, their movements rehearsed in whispered sessions over the past 2 days. Every turn of the ship's steel arteries felt like stepping deeper into enemy territory. When the false alert blared, an automated voice announcing oxygen depletion in hydroponics, Alara felt the vibration of hurried footsteps through the deck plates. Loyalists rushed toward the supposed emergency. The bridge would be thinly staffed for only minutes. Calder's voice crackled softly over the comm: "Locks are cycling. You'll have a narrow window." Alara approached the bridge hatch, her pulse steady despite the storm of adrenaline beneath. The door slid open to reveal only 2 crew members inside, both startled at her sudden entrance.
She didn't hesitate.
"Step away from the consoles.
Now."
Her voice carried the authority of someone who expected obedience. One hesitated, glancing toward Vaughn's private station at the far end of the room. She met his gaze with a warning sharpened by resolve. They stepped aside. Vaughn emerged from the rear alcove, composed as ever, though his eyes flickered with the faintest trace of irritation. "Commander Jinx, this is an unwise course. You weaponized this mission," she said evenly. "You turned my crew into subjects in a live combat trial without consent. That ends here." He tilted his head, as though regarding an unpredictable specimen. "You think you can control what's already in motion? Even if you hold this ship, the data is already transmitting. The trial's outcomes are inevitable." She moved to the primary console, fingers dancing across the holographic interface, severing uplink channels. Vaughn stepped forward, but Calder appeared in the doorway behind her, a sidearm in hand. The message was clear. Maeve's voice came over the comm, urgent. "I've intercepted a secondary channel. There's a fleet en route, Alliance vessels, but unregistered. Estimated arrival: 20 minutes. Alara glanced at the tactical display. The inbound ships were moving fast, their formation tight. "They're coming to secure their experiment," she murmured. Vaughn smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held no warmth. "And you've just made yourself the primary variable." Ignoring him, Alara activated the encrypted emergency channel reserved for colonial defense. Her message was brief, but deliberate, every word a blade. "This is Commander Alara Jinx of Arivos 9. The Earth Alliance is conducting a live biological weapons trial against its own crew. Data indicates civilian populations near contested borders are next. This is not science. It is an act of war." The transmission left the ship in a tight beam burst, vanishing into the void. Whether anyone would receive it before the incoming fleet arrived, she couldn't know. But the act itself felt like a line drawn in unalterable ink. Vaughn's composure finally cracked, a shadow crossing his expression. "You've doomed more than yourself. You've compromised the very stability you swore to protect." "I swore to protect lives," she said, turning to face him fully. "And that's exactly what I'm doing." The next minutes unfolded in tense silence, every sensor blip on the display drawing them closer to confrontation. Calder coordinated defensive measures, while Maeve rerouted power from non-essential systems to propulsion. The plan was no longer to hold position, they would run, and if the fleet pursued, they'd fight. When the first Alliance ship dropped out of warp, its sleek hull gleaming like a blade in the black, Alara felt the weight of inevitability settle over the crew. More vessels followed, each one a reminder that their rebellion had been anticipated. The bridge lights dimmed as Maeve executed an energy spike to mask their warp signature, buying precious seconds. Vaughn watched from the corner, restrained by two of Calder's security staff. "You can't win against them," he said quietly, almost pityingly. Alara didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical screen, on the growing wall of ships between Arrivos, 9, and Freedom. "They started this," she said, her voice steady as steel. "We'll finish it." The ship's engines roared to life, the deck trembling beneath their feet as the stars outside shifted. The first enemy vessel adjusted its course to intercept, weapons arrays blooming with light. Calder's hand hovered over the defensive controls, waiting for her order. "Hold," she said, the word carrying the calm weight of someone who had faced the abyss before and learned not to flinch. "We move on my mark." Every eye on the bridge fixed on her. The hum of the consoles, the distant pulse of the engines, the approaching wall of light, it all converged into a moment stretched thin, poised on the edge of violence. Somewhere deep in her chest, beneath the armor of discipline, Alara felt the ember of defiance flare into something brighter. This was no longer about survival. It was about answering a declaration of war with one of her own. And when her mark came, it would be the beginning of a fight none of them could turn back from.